Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Hello,
Uh,
Megan.
Hello, Alan. Thanks for being here. My name is Megan Searing Young, and I'm the director of the Greenbelt Museum here in Greenbelt, Maryland. Thanks so much for your interest in our programs, everyone watching. The presentation you're about to see was originally given by Alan Virta via Zoom on January 29th, 2026. As a result of some technical difficulties, the talk was not recorded, so our speaker has kindly offered to give the presentation again, and we're so grateful. For those of you who are new to our programs, we are a museum in Greenbelt, Maryland, which is one of three experimental green towns built in 1937 as part of the New Deal. The museum is a public-private partnership between the city of Greenbelt, which owns and operates the museum, and the Friends of the Greenbelt Museum, who spearhead fundraising to support the museum's mission. The museum house is open on Sundays from 1 to 5 with tours on the half hour, and we offer walking tours and programs and lectures and special events throughout the year. If you're not already, we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. We only send 1 to 2 messages per month, and it's a great way to stay up to date on progress on the museum's expansion to 10A Crescent and much more. So please visit our website to sign up. That's greenbeltmuseum.org. I'd also like to thank the Greenbelt Reparations Commission for co-sponsoring this event. To learn more about the commission, please visit greenbeltreparations.info. So turning to tonight, we're so pleased to welcome one of our museum's founders, Alan Virta. A former resident of Greenbelt, Alan was one of the original board members of the Friends of the Greenbelt Museum, and he served on the Greenbelt 50th Anniversary Committee. He's been long active with the Prince George's County Historical Society, and he's the author of the book, Prince George's County, A Pictorial History. He also served as the first chairman of the county's Historic Preservation Commission. Alan grew up in Prince George's County, attended Duval Senior High School, and has degrees in history and library science from the University of Maryland. Now retired and living in Boise, Idaho, he worked as an archivist at the Library of Congress, the University of Southern Mississippi, and Boise State University. The image there is from um, the Berwyn Project, which Alan will explain more, and we'll get started with his talk. Please join me in welcoming him. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Megan. And thanks to the Greenbelt Museum for inviting me, and thanks to the Reparations Commission for co-sponsoring this talk. Let me give a shout out first to Peter Schultz for sharing much of his research with me, and to my brother Bob Verda for accompanying me on some of my research and scouting expeditions. And uh, hello from Boise, Idaho, where this is the winter that wasn't. We haven't had much snow at all, but I understand you folks back in Greenbelt certainly have. So uh, you could have shared it with us. But let's start with a map. Oh, let's see what's going on. There we go. Let's start with a map of the corporate boundaries of Greenbelt outlined here in red. To the north, the agricultural center. To the south, Good Luck Road, including Greenbelt Park of the National Park Service. Goddard Space Center is on the east, and on the west is Berwyn Heights and the railroad tracks. A little more than 6 square miles, or about 4,000 acres, 3,000 if you don't count the park. My remarks will address this entire area, now home to about 25,000 people. There were only a few hundred people at most living here in 1935, the pivotal year in Greenbelt's history. They were mainly scattered across the rural countryside. That's the way it was until 1939, when Rexford Tugwell and Franklin D. Roosevelt had a vision. That's, of course, Roosevelt seated and Tugwell behind him. Their vision was to build a new town out in the wilds of Prince George's County. They wanted to provide affordable housing for Washington, which was facing a true housing crisis with the growth of the federal government. And they also wanted to provide work for the unemployed during the Depression. Tugwell's vision in particular was to create a town from scratch based on somewhat revolutionary planning principles, a town not built on the traditional grid, but instead an unusual superblock system. Pedestrian oriented, full of open space, and surrounded by a green belt of forest. And that is what they built. That is what today is considered the town's core, the original part of Greenbelt. But they were not building on a blank slate. So, what did the planners and surveyors find in 1935 on the site they planned to build Greenbelt? As I mentioned before, this was a rural neighborhood. Historically, it had been an agricultural area, first tobacco, then, after the Civil War, more diverse crops and livestock. But by the 1930s, most of the people who lived here may have lived on sizable lots, from 1 acre up to 100 acres, but very few still made their living solely through agriculture. Mary Lee Baker grew up on 15 acres south of Greenbelt Road in the 1920s and 30s. Her home was, she described it as, quote, behind Greenway Shopping Center, which of course was not there. I corresponded with Mrs. Baker back in 1996 rather, and she wrote, quote, to my knowledge, no one in the area was able to live off the land without a supplement from outside work. The 1930 census confirms that. Few people listed their occupations as farmer. There is one particular tool essential for researching the land and the people here before Greenbelt. It's this map, the Rosetta Stone for going back into the past before Greenbelt was built. This map was prepared by the federal government in 1935, showing who owned the nearly 100 pieces of property it planned to acquire for Greenbelt. From this map and the names on it, we can trace the individual pieces of property back through deeds and colonial land patents. We can learn about the people through censuses, historical records, and family trees on genealogical databases. On this particular copy, someone later sketched in the outline of Greenbelt's original street plan, which is extremely helpful in getting oriented. And you can see on the map on the right, I enlarged the what is the central core of Greenbelt, and you can read names on it. There are three other maps that are very helpful too. Detailed image of Prince George's County published in 1861, 1878, and 1894. This is Greenbelt in 1878. Greenbelt Road is sort of at the bottom. Let me move my cursor, and this is Greenbelt Road. This is Edmonston Road. Uh, Greenbelt Road actually should run more horizontally, but this map is not exactly oriented north-south. But you can see the two principal roads of Greenbelt at the time, Edmonston Road and Greenbelt Road. But back to 1935. This is an aerial view of the very center of the construction site. You'll notice a house toward the left behind the parked cars. This house stood where they planned to build the elementary school, which is now the community center. It was in good shape, enough so that they transformed it into the first aid station for the construction project. And they built an administration headquarters right next to it, where City Hall is today. The Butler family lived here, Edward and Hattie Butler, spelled Botteler. I wish I had a photo of them to show you, but I could not dig one up in time for this presentation. They represented the third generation of Butlers to live in Greenbelt. If you count their children, that makes four. Edward's grandfather, Lemuel, bought a farm in another part of town on the north end of town before the Civil War. Edward bought land in Greenbelt too, 61 acres, but he was not a full-time farmer. He did do some farming, but he was also a full-time employee at the government printing office in Washington. Mary Lee Baker, who I mentioned before, remembered the Butlers in her reminiscences of life here before Greenbelt. Quote, the Butlers loved music and country dancing, she wrote. My father played a five-string banjo. Some of my brothers were musically inclined too. Therefore, Saturday nights became a get-together. Roll up the carpet. Mr. Ed Butler was the figure caller. The ladies made food to share, and with perhaps a few others from the surrounding area joining in. Maybe the Torbert family joined them, I don't know, but they lived very close, the next farm over. This was their house in the loop of Ridge and Crescent Road, the One Courts. James M. Torbert bought 107 acres in 1888 and built this house soon afterwards. Three generations called this home. though they also had homes in Washington. They lived and worked there at the same time they farmed on their Greenbelt property. Bill Guerin wrote a letter to the editor of the News Review in 2017 recounting some of their family history as told to him by family members. Among other things, the family raised hogs. Neville Torbert, James' grandson, sold the land to the government in 1935 and moved to Beltsville, but went to work here in the new town, first for the Farm Security Administration, then through the transitions to the Public Housing Administration and the Greenbelt Cooperative. He was a veteran of World War I, and during the 1940s and 50s, he was a chaplain for the Greenbelt American Legion post. The Legion was and still is located in a house just to the west, the Boyle Farmhouse on Greenbelt Road, Boyle, Boyle. It sat on a 100-acre tract that the Boyles bought in 1927. You can see the Legion has made several additions. The core of the house, it is said, dates back to 1869. Moving westward on Greenbelt Road, this is a view of the intersection of Edmondson Road and Greenbelt Road in 1935. We're looking westward across Edmondson Road toward Route 1. The house you see in the foreground is now under Kenilworth Avenue. Continue westward on Greenbelt Road. This is a view of the intersection of Edmondson Road and Greenbelt. No, this is continue westward. You'll recognize this traffic nightmare, excuse me, the entrance to Beltway Plaza. But in the 1930s and even the 1940s, it looked like this. The lane led back to a home known as Hopedale, or the Governor Reed home. I'll get back to Governor Reed in a moment. Dorothy and Sherrod East and their family lived in this house in the 1930s and 40s. The land had been purchased by the federal government, but it did not tear the house down. Instead, the government rented it out to the Easts. Both Dorothy and Sherrod were community activists. Sherrod served a while on the city council. Dorothy told me when they finally had to move out of Hopedale, they took a piece of the banister with them as a memento. Back to Governor Reed. Here he is, and this is his house just before the Easts moved in. Reed was not the governor of Maryland. He was a journalist and politician from Wisconsin before President Lincoln appointed him Secretary of the Utah Territory. He also served as acting governor and clung to that title all his life. After the Civil War, he came to Maryland and bought 346 acres that now comprise Beltway Plaza, the Spring Hill Lake Apartments, and the Greenbelt Metro Complex, and maybe the FBI, who knows. Reed farmed and mined iron. There indeed was iron to be mined along Indian Creek. His was a fairly small operation. A larger one was right across the road in Berwyn Heights. The Maryland Geological Survey described their operations in the historical retrospective section of their annual report in 1911. Both mines had ceased operation by then. This map of the iron ores of Maryland shows the concentration of iron ore along the fall line. Greenbelt is one of those red dots. Now, if you go back to the 1950s and 60s like I do, you may remember the ruin of a large house tucked into the very corner where Greenbelt Road and the Beltway meet, just about where they built Royal Farms. These are photos of the house in its better days. The front view was taken during the land acquisition process in 1935. The other of the rear wing was taken by historian James Wilfong many years later. This rear section, and maybe even the central section of the main part, date back to the 1700s. The house was called Toping Castle, the home of the Walker family. They and their descendants, the Lesters and the Simons, owned the house from the patenting of the land tract in 1754 until the federal government bought it in 1935. One of the notable individuals to come out of this house was this man, Samuel Hamilton Walker, a hero of the Republic of Texas and co-inventor of the Walker Colt firearm. This print depicts his death during the Mexican War. This historical marker on Walker Drive tells the story of the Walker family based on a history first published in the 1880s. That origin story was long accepted until recent years. Researchers are now certain that the three Walker brothers were not Scotsmen fleeing a failed rebellion against England. They have found proof that the Walker family was well established in Prince George's County before they were born. The three brothers grew up on their father's plantation just a little north of Greenbelt in the Agricultural Research Center. If they fought in the Scottish Rebellion, they would have had to cross the Atlantic to do so. Not impossible, but we can ask ourselves how probable. There may be a grain of truth to that story, however. Their maternal grandfather was indeed a Scotsman who fought in an earlier rebellion. Perhaps over the years, the family lore became muddled. Behind the house, squeezed in between the golden excuse me, I'm sorry. Behind the house, squeezed in between the Golden Triangle and the office buildings uh, and the Beltway are the graves of the Walker family, including two, Isaac and Nathan, who were soldiers in the Revolutionary War. The grave sites are tended by the local DAR chapter. Across Greenbelt Park may lie the resting place of another Revolutionary War veteran. William Bailey was a prominent merchant in Georgetown, D.C., before retiring out to a farm that is now in the park. He died there, as you can see from this brief obit. We really don't know for sure if William Bailey is buried in the park, but it was then common practice to be laid to rest at home. So he may be resting there. His home was described as being near Bladensburg because that old colonial port was at that time the only town in northern Prince George's County. No Hyattsville, no College Park, no Lanham, no Greenbelt, no New Carrollton. All were, quote, near Bladensburg until after the Civil War. This map from 1795 shows the centrality of Bladensburg to northern Prince George's County. All roads lead to I highlighted them in red off this 1795 map. Bladensburg was the economic, commercial, social, and legal center of the region. There, farmers brought their tobacco to be shipped overseas, and there they shopped in the stores, socialized in the many taverns. The justices of the peace were there to notarize their legal papers. William Bailey was probably familiar with each of the buildings in this slide. They all still stand today. The building in the upper right is Bostwick, Christopher Lowndes' home, which I'll mention later. Next to it is the market master's house, and down below is what's now known as the George Washington House. It was then a brick store, and if you look very closely on the very right of that photograph, you see the edge of a building. That was the old Indian Queen Tavern of fame. Uh, so that's Bladensburg. But back to the center of Greenbelt to meet another family who lived there. These are William and Rachel Jones. I found their photos posted on the genealogical website ancestry.com. I wrote to the person who posted the family tree to confirm, but never heard back. But we can at least tentatively accept that this is indeed them. The Jones and their children were the only black family I have found who owned, and I emphasize the word owned, land in Greenbelt before the federal project. There were other black people who lived here before them, but I'll address them later. The Jones are one of the few families who actually identified as farmers in the 1930 census. They farmed in southern Prince George's County before they moved here. William came from the quaintly named village of TB. That's near Brandywine. Their farm here in Greenbelt was a long, narrow piece of land. This aerial photo shows what was their farm. Northway at the bottom of the photo, looking south along Ridge Road, and then even across Greenbelt Road, 140 acres all told. When they left Greenbelt, they eventually moved to Fairmont Heights, where William became a grocer. Now, we don't know exactly where their house is, but a number of us who worry about or think about such things believe that it might have been around where the Green Ridge house is, but we're just not sure the senior center there. Long before the Jones moved here, their farm and the adjacent farm to the east were owned by a man named Zebulon M. Honey. He was the owner of the National Stables in Washington, D.C. He described his two farms as dairy and truck farms. Honey had friends in high places. This article reports that General Nelson Miles, famous for his service in the Indian Wars in the West, came out to hunt on the farm in Greenbelt. And we see he bagged a number of birds when he was here on his visit. One of the relics left on Honey's farm was the Hamilton family cemetery, the only physical reminder of the Greenbelt family that went back to colonial times. It's located near the garden plots at the end of Hamilton Place. Long before the Joneses, long before Z.M. Honey, this was their land, part of a huge Hamilton's purchase. Another relic of the past that the land agents and surveyors found in 1935 was this old sunken road. It was still very much in use then. It was a northern extension of Edmondson Road. Today, the closed portion of Ridge Road that climbs the hill from Kenilworth at the police station up to the water tower. Before Edmondson Road was straightened in 1940, you had to climb that hill and go down the other side to go north towards Beltsville. Edmondson Road has a history that deserves a program of its own. The two mills that Greenbelt farmers used were along this road. To the north, there was Brown's Mill at Powder Mill Road, where the Masonic Lodge is located now. And to the south, Stevens Mill was located at Edmondson and Calvert Road, I think now ridiculously called Campus Drive by the Frisbee Golf Course. On this 1942 topo, you can see the courses of the road. Let me see if I can move my cursor. Well, I can't quite do it. You can see originally how Greenbelt Road or Edmondson Road went up the hill and then down the other side. Then in 1940, the hatched straightaway. Finally, they were able to negotiate the marsh and put in a bridge and let there be a more direct connection for Edmondson Road. The photo on the left is a remnant of the road that went down the hill on the other side, now in the agricultural center. On the top of the hill was a house known as Montebello, built, we think, by Benjamin K. Morsell in the 19th century. The family living there in 1935 were the Hurleys. Leroy and Louise Hurley bought the house and 50 acres attached to it in 1925. Because of the acreage, the Hurleys called their home the farm, even though Leroy worked full-time as a linotype operator for newspapers in Washington. When the Hurleys bought it, it was not in good shape. The previous owners had moved away 20 years before. They tried renting it out, but the intervening years had not been kind. The youngest Hurley granddaughter, whose mother grew up in the house, wrote to me that her mother, quote, described a very dilapidated house, and she could see sky through some gaps in the walls. During very cold days, the family would hang quilts of blankets from ropes that would close off an area around the fireplace so they had somewhere to warm up, unquote. Nevertheless, they took memories of good times with them when they moved. They were a musical family, very much involved in community affairs. Louise directed the choir at the Methodist Church in Beltsville. Leroy was a pianist and organist who accompanied them. Louise led the Beltsville 4-H and served as president of the Beltsville Women's Club. She visited the CCC camp in Beltsville to invite the young men to church. One of the boys not only came to church, but became a frequent visitor at the Hurley home, eventually marrying their daughter Grace. When the government bought their home, the Hurleys moved to Hyattsville. You can get a glimpse of the back of the house in this uh, family photo. Betty Ott, the Hurley granddaughter I mentioned, debated whether to send the front view I showed you just because it's not labeled. She thinks it must be the front of Montebello because it's the first picture in her mother's photo album, sort of a title page for the rest. And it did show a long line of trees leading to it, which also makes me think that was the front view of Montebello. The owners prior to the Hurleys were Milton and Mary Easby Smith. The Smiths were prominent Roman Catholic laymen. Milton edited a church newspaper and wrote for the Catholic Encyclopedia. Mary wrote to and organized church picnics at the home. When they lived there, the closest Catholic church was in Hyattsville, so the archdiocese granted permission for occasional masses to be celebrated at the home. There was not yet a Catholic church in Berwyn Heights. Uh, Montebello was famous for the lane of cedar trees that led up to it. As late as 19, long after the house was demolished, the News Review reported that the lane of cedar trees was still visible high on the hill from the center of town. On the left, you see a photo taken in 1935, aerial photo, that shows what was left of the line of cedar trees. And in the top right corner of that photo, you can see the water tower, I guess technically a standpipe. The trees are mentioned in a newspaper account about a grand reception that was held at the house in 1898 to welcome the Smith's son home from his service in the Spanish-American War. Quote, the beautiful grounds presented an animated scene as the light from many Chinese lanterns flashed through the old trees, casting brilliant rays along the avenue lined with majestic cedars and locusts. While the young people enjoyed dancing in the pavilion, the older gathered in groups on the grounds and promenaded through the avenues. The young soldier was also named Milton after his father. He married a neighbor, Nellie Turner, from the adjacent farmstead. This was her home on a tract of land called Wildcat. It was located on a hill above Ivy Lane, just west of Edmondson Road, not too far from the federal courthouse. Nellie's great grandfather, Shadrach Turner, acquired the land in 1759. It passed successively through three more generations of Turners before the last owner, John Prather Turner, sold it to the federal government. Here in this photo on the right, uh, you see John Prather Turner and his wife Ellen early in the 20th century. On the left, a photo of the house supplied to us by Frances Ellen McVeigh, one of Nellie's daughters, and her daughter, Anne McVeigh. The house was destroyed when Greenbelt was built, but the family cemetery has endured, though only one engraved headstone has survived. That was Thomas P. Turner. The cemetery is located on Ivy Lane, adjacent to where the house was located, and it's also adjacent to the city cemetery. It's believed that some of the rock stones, like the one in the picture on the right, may mark grave sites of people who were enslaved on the Turner farm. When the city cleared away the brush about 10 years ago, you could see that some of the rocks seemed to be arranged in rows. Shadrach Turner, who patented Wildcat, was an early convert to Methodism. Francis Asbury, the organizer of the Methodist Church in America, frequently wrote in his journal of staying with the Turners and preaching there during his travels. An historical marker commemorating Greenbelt's link to the early years of Methodism was placed along Edmondson Road many years ago. For the past years, it's been hidden by brush. There has been some talk about moving it to more an accessible spot. Shadrach Turner is memorialized in a stained glass window in the First Methodist Church in Hyattsville. He's there in the center along with other Methodist luminaries. Methodism in the late 18th and 19th centuries held great appeal to the enslaved black population in Maryland. Methodist circuit riders preached to large black audiences. Enslaved or free, they were counted as members of the church. Methodist records show that membership of the Bladensburg Circuit, which encompassed northern Prince George's County and Greenbelt, was predominantly black. Some statistics. In 1837, the white membership of the Bladensburg Circuit was 439. The black membership was 623. On the eve of the Civil War, the white membership had dropped off by almost half, but the black membership almost doubled to 680. Perhaps a few of them were free blacks because there were some in Prince George's County, but mostly enslaved people. Now, even though the blacks predominated in the membership numbers, the church, of course, was administered and organized and managed by white people. There was a Methodist church in Greenbelt before the Civil War. It was called the Union Meeting House, not far off Ridge Road in the north end of town. This was in the 19th century, after Shadrach Turner's time. This 1861 map shows its general location. I marked it by a cross there, so you can hone in on it. The 1 acre plot of ground was donated for the church by the grandchildren of Shadrach Turner in 1824. The deed pins down its precise location, but it would take a surveyor to correlate that tiny plot with the present day lay of the land. So can't say precisely where it was located beyond the hillside in Laurel Hill neighborhood. I haven't uncovered any documentary evidence for this. Given the demographics of the Bladensburg Circuit at that time, we can speculate that this church must have been a gathering place for the Greenbelt's black population before the Civil War, a place where they found community. A tantalizing clue of what could have been a remnant of the church appeared in an article in the News Review in 1969 regarding a burial ground at Hillside and Research Roads. It speaks of people's memories of rows of unmarked rock headstones that had by then disappeared by 1969. Was this a family graveyard, or could these stones have been associated with the church? Lore has come down from people who lived here before Greenbelt was built that contradicts that. It says the site was an Indian burial mound. I just don't know about that. But as far as a Union Meeting House goes, it does not appear on the 1878 Atlas of Prince George's County, although references to the road to the Union Meeting House were perpetuated in deeds up into the 20th century. At this point, let's jump back in time and talk about the settlement of Greenbelt, the development of the tobacco economy, the introduction of slavery, the Civil War, and emancipation. The archaeological record so far has not yet revealed any permanent Native American settlements in Greenbelt. We know that at the time of European contact, the closest permanent village was on the lower Anacostia River in the general vicinity of St. Elizabeth's Hospital. In 1609, Captain John Smith estimated its population was around 300. Off and on, this village was loosely affiliated with the larger Piscataway Empire of southern Maryland. So no known permanent settlements here, but at the edge of Greenbelt, archaeologists have discovered relics of what they believed was a seasonal camp used perhaps for gathering medicinal plants that grew in the marshy lowlands. This was located along Indian Creek in the rail yards of the Greenbelt Metro Station. Numerous stone tools were recovered from the site. Many of them are displayed on the Jefferson Patterson Park website. Jefferson Patterson Park is a state park that is the archaeology center for Maryland state government. If you want to read more about this archaeological site, you can Google Indian Creek 5. That's Roman numeral 5, Indian Creek V, and you can get a lot of find references to a lot of technical information. These two articles that I've posted here, which you can find either in the news review or online, are really written in non-technical language, plain English, that are really good summations of what was there. As far as Indian Creek is concerned, located at the back of the Golden Triangle, there are tales of secret Indian conflicts being held there. And Capital Beltway cut them off in the 1960s. The area quickly fell into disuse and became overgrown. The picture from this past winter. The water is still flowing, at least it was in December before the storms. I've read that the CCC built that wall, but I have not yet done the research to confirm that. A couple more photos. The one on the right from 1939, a child seems to be drinking the water. I don't know if anybody's drunk the water from it recently. So let's ask the essential question, why did European settlers, more specifically, the English and the Scots, come to Greenbelt? They came to grow this leaf tobacco. Along the Anacostia, beginning in the 1660s, land tracts were platted out in an orderly manner, like rows of piano keys. The ocean-going vessels had easy access to each plantation to take tobacco to the European markets. This pattern held up all the way up the river to the Fork, the later site of Bladensburg. But once settlers ventured into the interior, it became a free-for-all. The settlers claimed and bought acreage wherever they found advantageous locations. The first tract of land platted in Greenbelt was an anomaly. It was called the Friendships. It's outlined in red toward the top of the map on the right. The Friendships was a massive tract, 800 and some acres, patented in 1685. It stretched along the east side of Indian Creek and Beaver Dam Creek, from Berwyn Heights, arcing northeasterly, well up into the Agricultural Research Center. Colonel John Addison, seen here, and a business partner received a patent for the property in 1685, decades, as far as we know, before any British settlers actually came to Greenbelt. That's why I called it an anomaly. Why they patented this tract so far away from any settlements is a mystery. Addison, among other pursuits, traded with the Indians. Was it a trading outpost, or was it merely land speculation? We don't know. I've marked the site of Bladensburg in green in the very center of the map, and also for reference just below it in pink, I think you'd call it, Chevrolet. The first real settlers did not come to Greenbelt for another 30 or 40 years. The first lands claimed after Friendship are on the right of the big map. You see in blue and red and purple. Uh, they are superimposed on the Greenbelt land acquisition map. The tracts range from 50 to 100 acres, dwarfed by Friendship. On the right image, I enlarged the center of town so you can see that in more detail, how those two particular land tracts, Prathers Grove and Mendon, really took up most of what we consider the core of old Greenbelt. The first track after Friendship is outlined in blue toward the bottom of the map. It was called Pindall's Chance, patented in 1713 by Thomas Pindell Jr., Pindell. Greenway Shopping Center is on his land. Previously, it was the site of William Schramm's poultry farm and his son's venture, Schramm's Airport. That's previously before Greenway Center. Hanover Parkway joins Greenbelt Road in Pindall's Chance, and toward the south, toward Good Luck Road, it passes through the land tract known as Glover's Hall, which is outlined in brown down at the very, very bottom. One of the early tracts was called Makeshift. And I should say eventually that entire map was filled with land tracts. I just drew in the original ones. But one of those tracks was called Makeshift. It had a strange little hook, which is visible to this day. On the left, this is how it appeared on the 1935 land acquisition map, outlined in red, part of the Payne-Tidler tract. On the right, the current Google satellite view. That cul-de-sac of townhouses projecting north of Oregon Drive, set apart from the others along the north side of the street, was built in that hook of makeshift by a different developer than the others. They're actually part of the Greenbrook development as opposed to being part of Oregon or Windsor Green. Part of the land patenting process involved getting a certificate of survey. This is what a certificate looked like. It's for Prather's Grove in the heart of old Greenbelt. Quote, by virtue of a warrant issued out of his lordship's land office, his lordship was Lord Baltimore, I have surveyed for Jonathan Prather, Jr., all that tract of land called Prather's Grove, beginning at a bounded red oak tree standing near the head of Horsepen Branch on the eastern branch of Potomac River, 100 acres. Eastern Branch and Horsepen Branch may be terms unfamiliar to you. The Eastern Branch was the ancient name for the Anacostia River. What we call Indian Creek on the west side of Greenbelt was considered an extension of the Eastern Branch. It really didn't have a name of its own at that time. The Horsepen Branch of the Eastern Branch is what flows through Greenbelt into Indian Creek by the metro station. In 1935, a dam was built across Horsepen Branch to form Greenbelt Lake. On the right, a photo of the channeled Horsepen Branch today as it flows behind the homes on Northway Woodland Hills on its way to the lake. The beginning red oak tree of Prather's Grove was near here. On the left, a photo from the construction of the dam in 1935 with an old barn in the background. Just to be confusing, there's another Horsepen Branch in Bowie, but that is the Horsepen Branch of the Patuxent. Our Horsepen Branch is the Horsepen Branch of the Eastern Branch. In 1719, Lord Baltimore levied a head tax on all the free men in Maryland. On this tax list from 300 years ago, we see the names of the first settlers of Greenbelt, or more specifically, the adult males who were the heads of households. They're the last four names on the list. Thomas Pindall is there in the middle of the list. John Riddle, who owned part of the North Woods, the Prathers of Prather's Grove, and on the list you can see Captain Edmonston, for whom Edmonston Road is named. Most of Berwyn Heights is built on his land, which he called Yarrow. As I mentioned before, the early settlers of Greenbelt came to grow tobacco, a very time and labor intensive crop. To be profitable, they needed labor beyond what they themselves and their children could provide. Some of them turned to human bondage, first in the form of indentured servants from the British Isles. There were two categories of servants. First, men and women who would bind their labor and their lives out for a period of years, 4 or 5 or 7, in return for transport to Maryland and eventual freedom. And second class of indentured service were convicts, whom Britain was pleased to be free of. Once these people be auctioned off. On the left is an ad from one such auction in Bladensburg. Most of these servants, men and women alike, would work the fields, though some with specialized skill could be put to work otherwise. Listing of schoolmasters in Prince George's County in 1754 revealed that five of the teachers were actually indentured servants, two of whom were convicts. educated convicts, we presume. Being an indentured servant was more than a job. They were subjects of their owners. They could be sold to others. They could be used as collateral for mortgage. They could be punished bodily if they ran away. And if they ran away, they were hunted down, as this ad on the right from the Maryland Gazette illustrates. Both these ads happen to be uh, published by Christopher Lowndes, who lived in Bostwick House in Bladensburg, which you can still see. He built it in 1746. Others placed similar ads besides him. Uh, Indentured servants came and went in a period of years. If they survived the hard work and what was called seasoning, acclimation to Maryland's climate, with some better days could lie ahead. We know some were badly mistreated. Others prospered and ended up marrying into their masters' families. In Maryland, indentured servants provided much of the additional labor needed in the 17th and early 18th century, outnumbering by far the Africans who were brought here. But as the 18th century progressed, and particularly as the practice of indentured servitude of white people diminished, the Topeka planners turned to the enslavement of blacks, newly captured Africans and their American-born descendants. Examining tax records and census records, as well as the probate records of Greenbelt landowners, it becomes apparent that slavery was firmly rooted in Greenbelt as the 18th century progressed. The concept of Greenbelt obviously did not exist then, so the only way to calculate Greenbelt's population is to know who owned the land and find them in the assessment and censuses. Often you can see the census takers moving along Greenbelt Road or Edmondson Road in order, farm by farm, and you can guess that the names in between the known landowners are tenant farmers. Using that method, I'll give you some statistics. I picked out three representative years: 1798, 1828, and 1860. You can see in the top row of this chart that all of Greenbelt's 4,000 acres were not owned by very many people. 18, 17, 16. The white population was not very big. The black population in 1798 was only 31. By 1860, it had climbed to 161. So you can see the increasing uh, practice of enslavement of blacks. For Black History Month, now we know the names of white people from the census, the tax assessment, and deeds. Unfortunately, the names of enslaved blacks were rarely showed up in these documents, but there are ways of learning who they were. For Black History Month last year, I wrote an article on Vachel and Flora Waters and their children. They were enslaved, but also emancipated at the Turners in Greenbelt. In the interest of time, I won't repeat myself, but if you're interested, check it out in the News Review website in their archives. Being able to find so much information on an enslaved family is not common because they are usually only referred to by their first names in official records. In the case of the Waters, I was helped along by the fact that Vachel and Flora were such distinctive names at the time. I was able to find them in later records that did include their last names and go back to the earlier records which did not. The most productive route to learning the names of the enslaved is through the probate records of those who held them in slavery. The enslaved individuals were considered property, and as such were listed in the estate inventories of deceased individuals. On the right in this slide, uh, you can see an excerpt from the probate papers of Samuel Hamilton, who died in 1857. His vast land holdings were mostly on the east side of the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, Greenbrier condos, Eleanor Roosevelt High School, Windsor Green, etc. Listed are the names of 17 individuals who were enslaved on his plantation. The probate papers of other enslavers in Greenbelt do the same. Most of those are online from the Maryland State Archives. And you can see how they were listed. John, age 61 years, and his appraised value. Bill, George, Matthias, John the Younger, resin. Columbus, Joe, Moses, Henry, Harriet, Nancy, Elizabeth, Partridge, Martha, Wesley, and concluding with Frank, 6 months old, whose appraised value was $75. Historians have called slavery, quote, the peculiar institution. To illustrate some of the perplexing contradictions of slavery, we could look at several provisions of Samuel Hamilton's will. There certainly is a paternalistic tone to it, reflecting his ability to control the lives of quote unquote his people. If my Negroes conduct and behave themselves properly and orderly as good servants, that after my decease they may have the privilege of choosing their masters. That is, they would not be sold south. He granted them the privilege, in quotes, to seek out other places to be enslaved. Indeed, when Hamilton's estate was liquidated, he had no children to leave it to. All these 17 people were purchased by local people living in Greenbelt or the near vicinity. In fulfillment of Samuel Hamilton's will, some of the 17 may very well have arranged their own purchase themselves. Another provision in Hamilton's will, quote, I hereby reserve 1/4 of an acre to include the graveyards on my estate of my colored as well as white family. Old family cemeteries in Maryland are often presumed to hold both the remains of the white families, but also the people they enslaved. In this case, we know it happened here, right at the end of Hamilton Place. Resistance to slavery in the form of running away or self-liberation was a problem enslavers faced. This is one of the many ads they placed in the newspapers advertising the runaways and offering rewards for their return. John C. Herbert did not live in Greenbelt, but less than a mile away was his home. If you've driven north on Edmondson Road, you may have seen this house that's pictured on the left right there. It's near the intersection of Edmondson Road and Powder Mill. The Underground Railroad is storied in American history. In 1872, William Still published the stories of hundreds of men and women that his committees in Philadelphia helped when they arrived. 2 of those stories are of local men. Tom Matthews was from the plantation Yarrow, now Berwyn Heights. The home of his enslaver, Ethan Allen Jones, still stands at the end of a long lane off Natasha Drive. The other man, Adam Smith, came from Branchville. You can see Still's book in full online. You can easily find it by Googling Underground Railroad, William Still. After universal emancipation in Maryland in 1864, most of the enslaved people here seem to have left Greenbelt, leaving the white people behind. Actually, the exodus began 2 years before, when the slaves in the District of Columbia were freed. This newspaper article tells how slaves from Prince George's County used the district as a safe haven even before emancipation was formally enacted in Maryland. The poster celebrates the achievement of emancipation in the state. The 1870 census, the first in which Black people were named and enumerated after slavery, shows only a handful of Black people living in Greenbelt. A few women, mainly in domestic service in white homes. Amos Reed employed maybe 8 to 10 single Black men on his farm and iron mine. That's about it. The families were gone, with one prominent exception I'll mention shortly. This exodus of the Black population impacted both agriculture and land use. Tobacco cultivation had been fading away anyway in Greenbelt. Emancipation was its death knell. The agricultural censuses of 1860, 70, and 80 show less and less tobacco being produced, virtually none by 1880. more diverse crops predominated. That was the story until a new type of settler came to Greenbelt starting in the late 19th century. Men and women working in Washington who wanted a little acreage under their feet. 16 landowners in all of Greenbelt in 1860. By 1935, more than 100. The late 1920s saw the beginnings of community organizing in Greenbelt. DC newspapers announced the meeting of the newly formed, quote, Northeast Berwyn Citizens Association. One such meeting was held at the home of Mrs. Fury, whose pre-Greenbelt home still stands on Ridge Road. Louise Hurley from Montebello provided the music for the meeting. Of course, when I say first community organizing in Greenbelt, it was not Greenbelt yet. It was just still that rural neighborhood, which by this time took on the name Northeast Berwyn. Let me close this talk with a couple stories from the Civil War about soldiers from Greenbelt, both Union and Confederate. Mason McNew was a young man in his 20s, living with his wife, his brother, and children on more than 100 acres in southeast Greenbelt. That's Greenbrook, Green Spring, etc. Mason and his brother went south when the war broke out. Both served in the 1st Maryland Cavalry, a Confederate unit. Some of Mason's exploits, sneaking through enemy lines close to Federal troops, were recounted in articles in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, in Mrs. McNew's obituary, and in a book called 4 Years in the Saddle by one of his colleagues, Harry Gilmore. And one of the incidents supposedly took place at his home here in Greenbelt, an encounter with Federal troops, when he obviously had come home for a visitor, snuck back across Union lines. The Union was represented too. In fact, both a Union soldier and a Confederate soldier came from the very same farm. Dr. Septimus J. Cook was a physician and known Southern sympathizer. He lived on part of the vast Friendship Tract. His farm fronted on Edmondson Road, part in Greenbelt, part in the Agricultural Research Center. His son Adolphus went south in 1861 and joined the same Confederate unit as the McNew brothers. Adolphus was not the only man from the Cook farm to serve. Another man was named, excuse me, I went a little too far there. Adolphus was not the only man from the Cook farm to serve. Another man was a man named William Locks. Locks was enslaved on the Cook farm when the black men were made eligible for the draft. He was drafted. He served in the 28th United States Colored Troops till the end of the war. The unit sustained heavy losses in the Battle of the Crater and the Siege of Petersburg. Those happened just a couple weeks after Locks was assigned to the regiment, so we really don't know for sure if he made it there in time for the battles or not. Whatever the case, he finished up the war with the 28th U.S. Colored Troops. After the war, he returned to Greenbelt. In 1870, the census finds him, his wife, their young children, and his mother living right next to their old enslaver. Locks was one of the few blacks to stay in Greenbelt after the war. Sadly, though, he died in 1879, not quite 40 years old. Locks and Adolphus Cook were about the same age. We can only wonder if they knew each other as children, if they played together, and what the relationship was between Locks and his former enslaver after the war. Locke's occupation in 1870 was recorded as a farm laborer, so it's quite possible that he was working for Dr. Cook, this time as a free man. Dr. Cook reported that another one of the enslaved on his farm also served in the Union Army. That man was named Samuel Snowden. The entry in the county record book is short but poignant. Quote, drafted and died in service, regiment unknown. This might be his grave. Military records reveal that there were 3 Samuel Snowdens serving in 3 different regiments of the United States Colored Troops during the war. We know 2 were mustered out at the end of the war, and the third died in a military hospital in New York. So is this Samuel Snowden of Greenbelt? Unfortunately, none of the service records that I've been able to find online report the home state of the man buried here, just his service with the 45th U.S. Colored Regiment. So I don't want to jump to conclusions, but two lived, one died. The process of elimination suggests that this is Samuel Snowden of Greenbelt. If that is indeed the case, there is a small plot of hallowed ground in the National Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, that is the final resting place of a man from Greenbelt, Maryland, once enslaved, who fought for his country and his freedom. Thank you very much. And thank you, Megan.
Thank you so much. Let me change this view and then I have some questions from the audience that I'd like to ask you, if that's okay. Let me see here. First question, you addressed a little bit, but what was the area called before it sort of became before it was named Greenbelt?
Okay, at the beginning, it was, well, before Bladensburg was established in 1742, it was just land along the eastern branch of the Potomac River. When Bladensburg was established in 1742, it became known as near Bladensburg. It didn't have a name, it was just near Bladensburg. And everything in northern Prince George's County was pretty much near Bladensburg. Uh, After the Civil War, uh, when Beltsville got going, sometimes it was recorded as near Beltsville. Uh, then later on, it became near Branchville, and Branchville was where Greenbelt Road crosses the railroad tracks, and Branchville Volunteer Fire Department is still there. You see that there. And then you see in the late 1920s, when the Citizens Association was formed, they began calling it uh, North Northeast Berwyn, because Berwyn Heights was of course the nearest settlement, the nearest community. So it goes through those names. Land on the East Branch, near Bladensburg, near Beltsville, near Branchville, near Berwyn, and maybe finally Northeast Berwyn. Uh, in fact, before the name Greenbelt was chosen for the new town, it was called the Berwyn Project, as you can see in this slide here.
Right.
So, uh, number of names.
Yeah, I know when researching Greenbelt, it's often helpful to look up Berwyn Project if you can't find something under under Greenbelt for those early years, especially. So you mentioned two houses outside of Greenbelt. Could you talk to us a little bit more about them?
Sure. Let me go back to those slides. Uh, the first one I mentioned was in conjunction with the ad for a slave who had run away. Uh, that house was called Yarrow, and it's in Berwyn Heights still today. It's on the end of a lane that comes off Natasha Drive. And this is a recent picture of the house. The Berwyn Heights Historical Committee really does a great job in documenting Berwyn Heights history. They have a wonderful website, and they've put up historical markers around town. The On the left is the old portion of the house, uh, which goes back to the 1700s. In 1798, it was inhabited by Ruth Edmonston, who would have been, several generations down from Captain Edmonston, who founded the plantation. She would have been his great daughter-in-law, I presume. The right side was built by Ethan Allen Jones, who placed that ad in the 1850s. So this is the house that Tom Matthews, the slave who self-liberated himself, and is mentioned in William Still's History of the Underground Railroad. This is a house he would have known. The second house that I mentioned was Walnut Grange. That's the one further north on Edmondson Road at Powder Mill. Uh, it probably was what you might call the only mansion in the immediate area. You know, when you think of mansion, a big, imposing house, as opposed to a, frame house, some of which were very nice, of course, but this was a true mansion. Built by John C. Herbert, who was a congressman, and his wife. His wife was a Snowden from Montpelier in Laurel, which is a historic site. Uh, it built a brick about 1805. It was much larger than what you see in this picture. It was because part of it burned down
Mm.
in the 1850s, I think it was, and this is all what is left, but it's still quite impressive to see the when the Beltsville Agricultural Center was begun. This is where the superintendent lived.
Oh,
Uh, I'm not sure what it's used for now, but some sort of administrative function for the agricultural center. Just drive up Edmondson Road and turn right on Powder Mill, and it's right there. You can see it. So.
oh, that's so interesting. It's still there. Um, you mentioned uh, Montebello. Um, where exactly was that? I think you mentioned it, but these are questions that we received during the first presentation. So I'm trying to go back and um, ask them again so that you can talk a little bit more about these. I know you mentioned Montebello, but where was it specifically?
Okay, specifically, if you know where the water tower is, right where Ridge Road sort of ends and you have to turn left onto Lassner Lane, that's where the big water tower is. And it was right, we'd say, behind the water tower. From Ridge Road, there was a line of cedar trees that led to it. So uh, probably, I guess you'd say, didn't they knock down a house behind the water tower to expand the grounds of the water tower? So it was probably very, very near there.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, you mentioned the sunken road, but this question from a viewer was, why is the sunken road at Ridge not connected? There's no trespassing signs there. And is there a home back there still today?
There is a home off of that portion of the road. Uh, I mentioned it in that newspaper article that talked about the Northeast Berwyn Citizen Association. It was referred to as Mrs. Fury's home, and that was indeed a pre-Greenbelt home that was built all around 1900 by the Fury family, and their descendants uh, still live in the house. Why Ridge Road was disconnected, I don't know. It, but for some reason it was,
Right,
and so the only access through it is by the family, Fury family, and then the WSSC uh, trucks to get to the water tower.
right,
Uh,
right,
at the very bottom, it's also can be used as an exit from the parking lot of one of those apartments, but that's at the very bottom of the road. You're not supposed to drive further up it.
right. There's a question from someone who lives here in Greenbelt who said that they have found a couple of pieces of Greek attic marble and brick wall parts in their yard that's in Plateau Place. Are there any, could that be remnants of a churchyard? Do you know of anything like that that might have been there?
No, I don't know that far away from where that church is, Methodist church is listed on the map. So I can't say if that's the
That's a
remnant.
mystery. Right, right.
That's a
Is the Addison you mentioned the one for whom Addison Road is named? Is that where
yeah,
that name comes from in this area?
John Addison. He lived at Oxon Hill Manor on the Potomac opposite Alexandria. not the current Oxon Hill Manor house. That burned, the old one, his house, burned in a spectacular fire.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
I'm not sure exactly when. And the brick house that's there now, known as Oxon Hill Manor, was built, I believe, in the 1920s or 30s.
Are there any, you did talk quite a bit about the cemeteries that are known. Are there other cemeteries that you know of that may be in and around Greenbelt that have not been documented, as well as the ones that are
Yeah, well,
extant?
I know of two that I probably think have been obliterated.
Yeah.
Uh, when the Capitol Beltway was built and they made that big exit ramp that goes, if you're driving, coming up the Capitol Beltway from 450 or from Oxon Hill, coming north, and you exit the Beltway to come to either get on the Parkway or get on to Greenbelt Road, that exit ramp runs right by an old family cemetery.
Okay.
Uh, we don't know whose. And from the map, it looks like it could be someplace in the Cloverleaf, but I
Yeah.
kind of believe it probably was obliterated uh, during the construction of the Beltway. And there are there's one that might be some of the deeds for the land down around the Greenway Shopping Center talk about a cemetery uh, there, but of course, you know, they're
Yeah.
just they're
They get
gone.
lost to time,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Absolutely.
on the other side of the railroad tracks, uh, behind the National Agricultural Library, is a family graveyard of the Prather family,
Mm.
and who were involved in land over there on the other side of the railroad tracks as well as in Greenbelt. So that's another one. But you can't really get to it. It's just so primitive and so
Yeah.
overgrown over there.
Inaccessible at this point.
Inaccessible, that's the
Yeah.
better word.
Yeah. Well, the city of Greenbelt is actually working on has contract with consultants to work on a master plan for how to take care of the cemeteries that are known and potentially how to preserve them, how to preserve the history around them. So that's exciting. Hopefully, we'll have more updates about that. And lastly, I wanted to ask, reportedly, the city of Greenbelt may annex about 2,000 additional acres into Greenbelt to become part of the city. Uh, I'm guessing that'll affect the statistics that you mentioned in the talk.
Yes, it would make them obsolete. That land, I've seen the maps of what they're considering to annex is mainly NASA and land in the agricultural center that goes all the way up to Beaver Dam Road, and then it goes out to Good Luck Road. So in terms of there really isn't, I don't think anybody who lives in the land that's proposed to be annexed. But when you look at the statistics I gave you about the number of landowners and the numbers of the population, those apply to Greenbelt as it exists today in January and February 2026. And
Right.
if all that land is annexed, well, that opens us up to a lot more stories
That's
because
right.
there were in the past a lot more people who live there, quite a few farms, and what interesting things lie there, you know.
We'll have you
Or,
back for another talk so that you can
sure, sure,
do all
sure.
that research and talk about that the next time. So that's great. Thank you so much again for doing all the research for this talk and giving it and then giving it again. We're just incredibly grateful for all the research. And do you have anything else you would like to add, to close out the talk? We are again so grateful for your expertise and your knowledge.
Oh, I think that's about it. I'll put up a slide with my email on it
Oh,
down
great.
at the bottom. So feel free to email me if you have any particular questions, I can,
Terrific,
or
terrific.
you have some, you can solve some of the mysteries. You know the
Right.
answer to some.
Information to share, right? Yeah, our photographs or things like that. Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, people can also get in touch with me. I'm Megan Young at the Greenbelt Museum. You can find my information on the website or through the city directory. So thank you again so much. We're going to end it there, and we look forward to having you back again.
Well,
Thanks,
thank
Alan.
you.
Thank you.